Is Donald Trump determined to keep the United States in control of the world's semiconductor future?
But in April, Beijing delivers a shock that rattles the very foundations of the global chip order. From his second term in office, Donald Trump made one thing clear. Semiconductors are not just about business, they are about national security. His administration tightened export bans, blocking Chinese firms from accessing NVIDIA's most advanced chips and TSMC's cutting-edge nodes. ASML, the Dutch giant, faced mounting pressure as Washington lobbied allies to stop selling its EUV lithography machines to China. To back this strategy, the White House celebrated TSMC's $100 billion expansion in Arizona, funded in part with $6 billion in subsidies. For Trump, this was proof that America could secure its own chip supply and reduce reliance on Asia. Alongside tariffs on a wide range of imports, the message was blunt. Washington would squeeze China's technology ambitions until they broke. But on April 2025, Beijing unveiled its own decisive move. The government ordered state-linked firms to terminate all procurement contracts with ASML and halt advanced chip orders from TSMC. Analysts at Bernstein called it the most decisive pivot in semiconductor sovereignty since 1987. Behind this announcement was preparation. According to IC Insights, China's SMIC had already doubled its deep ultraviolet lithography capacity to more than 300,000 wafers per month compared with 2023. Huawei, once crippled by US sanctions, returned with the Mate 70 Pro powered by a domestically built 7nm chip. A February 2025 teardown by Tech Insights confirmed it ran without foreign tools or imported wafers, performing only 17% below Apple's A7 Pro, but competitive in AI benchmarks. In March 2025, Huawei's Qingpu facility began volume production of the Ascend 910, designed to rival NVIDIA's H100. By May, Reuters reported that over 30 Chinese AI firms had already signed supply agreements, filling a $7 billion market vacuum left after NVIDIA's exit. This was not improvisation. It was a deliberate inversion of the supply chain. For Trump, the costs were immediate. UBS reported a 12% drop in ASML's advanced tool bookings from Asia in the first quarter of 2025. TrendForce noted TSMC's foundry utilization slid to 76%, down from 89% a year earlier, largely due to lost Chinese contracts. Meanwhile, Beijing's strategy looked different. SMIC pushed into 3nm experimentation using DUV and complex quadruple patterning even at yields of 40%. Subsidies covered the losses, while demand from defense and AI projects guaranteed buyers. By the second quarter of 2025, the China Semiconductor Industry Association confirmed that 82% of components in China's sub-10nm production were already domestically sourced. The most alarming signal came from a leaked blueprint in February 2025, a prototype for a laser-induced discharge plasma EUV source. Early lab tests reported in the E-Journal of Photonics suggested efficiency nearly 8 times higher than ASML's current systems. Though still far from industrial scale, the implications were clear. If China succeeds, ASML's $170 million EUV units consuming over 1 megawatt each could become obsolete. Trump built his trade and tech agenda on the belief that America could contain China's semiconductor rise. Yet by mid-2025, Beijing had cut the cord from ASML and TSMC and was already testing its own path forward. The question now is whether Trump can still dictate the rules of global technology, or if China is on the verge of rewriting them.
But for the rest of the world, we're going to have things done by Friday, and Friday is not that far away. So you should expect, we said August 1st is the date that we're setting all these rates, and they are off to the races after that.
As the calendar approaches August 1st, President Trump's trade ultimatum is looming. Under his deal or tariff strategy, countries that fail to reach a trade agreement with the US by this deadline face tariffs ranging from 15% to as high as 50%. With deals already signed with Japan and the European Union, Trump is claiming momentum. But two of the biggest players, China and Canada, are still holding out. This is no longer just a matter of trade mechanics. It's a global stress test of Trump's leverage and the willingness of others to play by his timeline. After 2 days of negotiations in Stockholm, US and Chinese officials left the table without a signed breakthrough, while Chinese officials announced a 90-day extension of the tariff truce. High in the rugged mountains of Yunnan Province, China, a team of unmanned aerial vehicles lifted 180 tons of steel and concrete, 1,650 meters above sea level to build 3 solar transmission towers. The mission took only 3 days, not a month. Not a single road had to be built. Just drones operating autonomously, navigating narrow mountain paths through the air. It wasn't just a logistical milestone, it was a signal. While the drones flew quietly across the cliffs of southwestern China, a storm was brewing on the other side of the world. In Washington, President Donald Trump was preparing an aggressive new round of countermeasures aimed directly at Beijing's growing dominance in drone technology. This is no longer about toys or delivery gadgets, it's about power and who controls the skies just above our heads. The Yunnan operation, confirmed by China's Central Television on May 17, featured 16 heavy-lift UAVs. Each aircraft could carry up to 420 kilograms with a maximum range of 1.3 kilometers per flight. According to Yunnan Grid Corporation, the use of drones reduced labor by 60%, cut road building costs by 80%, and saved nearly 2,000 trees by avoiding ecological disruption. But this wasn't a one-off stunt, it's part of a national strategy. Across the country, China is scaling up what it calls the low-altitude economy. Shenzhen alone is home to over 1,730 drone-related companies, contributing to a production volume nearing 96 billion yuan, as reported in Drone World Congress 2025. This year's Congress drew over 76,000 attendees from more than 100 countries. Over 800 companies showcased 5,000 innovations from firefighting drones to flying taxis, from vertical takeoff cargo systems to swarm-capable UAVs with built-in neural networks. The message from China was clear. Drones are no longer future tech. They are here. They are versatile and they are deeply integrated into infrastructure, transport, and security. Behind this surge stands Xi Jinping. This isn't just about innovation for innovation's sake. Under Xi's leadership, drone technology plays a central role in 3 interconnected strategies: Made in China 2025, military-civil fusion, and smart industrialization. From XPeng's modular flying car system in Guangzhou, with an expected annual output of 10,000 units, to micro-drones that flap their wings like birds for reconnaissance missions. China is engineering a world where drones monitor traffic, rebuild power grids, respond to natural disasters, and when needed, serve in defense. Xi's long-term vision is to make drones as common as delivery trucks or utility poles, visible, essential, and state-directed. Back in Washington, President Trump is not sitting idle. On July 10, 2025, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced sweeping reforms to accelerate America's drone capability. For the first time, military commanders at the colonel level can directly procure and test drones, including 3D printed prototypes without going through the Pentagon's traditional bureaucracy. Drones under 150 pounds are now classified as consumables like ammunition, not capital assets, removing inventory restrictions and speeding up deployment. In addition, the Department of Commerce has launched national security investigations under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, targeting imported drones and drone components from China, especially from companies like DJI and Autel. The goal: reduce reliance, protect data, and rebuild domestic capacity. The Trump administration is also pushing federal contracts to prioritize U.S.-made drones, part of a larger campaign to outpace Beijing in the air and on the market. What happened in the mountains of Yunnan may look like construction, but in a world where altitude equals influence, drones are now tools of strategy. On one side stands Xi Jinping with national-scale mobilization, AI-enhanced flight systems, and massive investment. On the other is Donald Trump, removing red tape, weaponizing trade laws, and rebuilding a domestic industry from the ground up. The competition isn't only about who can fly higher, it's about who controls the infrastructure of tomorrow. Because in the skies just above us, the future is already moving. At the end of the day, look, no matter what, the United States and China have to have relations. We have to have communication. We have to be able to interact with one another, and it's just impossible for the foreign ministers of our respective countries to not engage in conversation. Amid rising tariffs and a looming power shift in Asia, in the humid corridors of Kuala Lumpur, far from the headlines of New York or Beijing, 2 of the world's most powerful nations quietly took a step back from the edge. The first face-to-face meeting between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and China's top diplomat Wang Yi wasn't about signing a deal or shaking hands for the cameras. It was about something deeper, testing the waters for a future summit between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump and exploring whether the world's 2 economic giants could avoid another spiral into confrontation. But behind the smiles and soft words, the real story is still simmering. Xi Jinping's China, determined to hold its ground and extend its influence in Asia, faces its old rival, Trump's America, once again raising tariffs and global tensions. Obviously, you know the issue of trade comes up, but as I remind everybody, there's no country in the world that I can meet with right now where the issue of trade and tariffs wouldn't come up, because this is a global. For nearly an hour, the two diplomats spoke behind closed doors. Wang Yi reiterated that China doesn't shy away from competition, but it rejects confrontation. He made clear that Beijing opposes what it sees as coercive trade measures and called for the United States to immediately roll back tariffs. Rubio, speaking for an administration that just imposed new duties as high as 40% on countries like Myanmar and Laos, insisted the meeting was positive, constructive. He didn't offer specifics, but confirmed what many suspected. Both sides are preparing for a potential Trump-Xi summit later this year. Still, this wasn't a negotiation, it was a first step, a conversation. And beneath the polite exchanges, both sides were already calculating their next move in a much bigger game. Of course, China is very keen to exploit this tariffs issue, and both the United States and China now are vying for trade in that part of the world, because this is no longer just about trade. It's a power struggle over the future of Asia, and Xi Jinping knows it. Trump's return to the White House has reignited an aggressive push to reset America's trade relations. Since June 2025, the U.S. has reinstated a wave of tariffs, 25% on Japan and South Korea, and up to 40% on Southeast Asian nations like Malaysia, Laos, and Myanmar. The justification correcting what Trump calls decades of unfair trade. But for Xi, this is an opening. Beijing has begun positioning itself as a more stable and predictable partner. While Washington pushes tariffs, China is working to expand the RCEP agreement, deepen trade with ASEAN, and send a message. We're not the disruptors here. A new poll revealed a disturbing truth. Groceries, not rent or loans, and now America's biggest source of financial across the United States, families are feeling the squeeze every time they shop for food. Polling from the Associated Press and North Sea shows 53% of Americans now see grocery costs as their biggest source of financial stress, more than housing, loans, or gas. The pressure is mounting, and at the center of it all is President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff policy. What was designed as a bold push for trade leverage is rippling from American farms to supermarket aisles, while China, the primary rival in this showdown, is hitting back with its own calculated moves. In July 2025, the Trump administration locked in historically high tariff rates. More than 60 countries are now facing higher duties, with a minimum 15% applied to any nation with which the U.S. runs a trade deficit. For certain partners, the rates are far higher: 25% on Indian shrimp, 35% on non-USMCA Canadian goods, and 40% on goods rerouted through third countries. The effects are visible across the food supply chain. Beef, pork, soybeans, fresh produce, and imported staples like bananas are now more expensive. Retailers report paying up to 50% more for some seafood imports. USDA data shows U.S. agricultural trade is projected to run a record $49.5 billion deficit in fiscal year 2025, as export orders collapse and import costs rise. For farmers, tariffs on machinery and fertilizer raise production costs. For grocers, higher import bills mean razor-thin margins and difficult choices on passing costs to shoppers. Trump frames this as a necessary short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. But the immediate reality is a consumer market where weekly grocery bills are climbing even for basic items. Beijing's answer came swiftly. On March 10, 2025, China imposed tariffs of 10 to 15% on key U.S. farm exports, grains, cotton, fresh produce, poultry, and beef in direct retaliation for Washington's new 20% duties on Chinese goods. It has restricted wheat and sorghum imports, suspended soybean purchases from certain U.S. suppliers, and leaned harder on Brazil to fill demand. The result, China's U.S. soybean imports, worth nearly $13 billion in 2024, are set to drop sharply this year. These moves align with a broader domestic strategy. China is in a rare period of surplus production, record grain harvests, wheat prices at 5-year lows, and a drop in consumer food prices that pushed its CPI into negative territory in March. The showdown isn't over. It's just entering its next phase. From the deserts of Xinjiang to the boardrooms of ASEAN, the world is watching Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. Two leaders, two visions, and a deal that could shape the next decade. Will it end in compromise or confrontation? We may soon find out.